In this lesson, we're going to be talking about support and resistance levels. Now, the ones that we are mainly going to be focusing on are horizontal support and trend line support and resistance lines. So horizontal line and trend lines. We have not dug into them yet, so this is going to be the first lesson that we're actually going to be talking about horizontal support and resistance levels and trend lines acting as support and resistance levels. But if you think back into the previous lessons, we already talked a little bit about support and resistance, such as the exponential moving average. If you remember, that is a dynamic support and resistance level. It means that price action bounces from it and reverses, right? It acts as either support or resistance. It's levels where price action hits it and then reverses in the opposite direction. So in this one, we'll dig a little bit into the dynamic support and resistance levels, but we're mainly going to be focusing on the static ones, such as horizontal support and resistance and trend line support and resistance. So let's have a look at the charts. And right away, the one thing that I want you to know when it comes to these horizontal and trend line support and resistance levels is that they are not indicators, they are drawing tools. Right, so you have to plot them yourself. This is actually doing the actual analysis, is figuring out where price action might potentially reverse, where are the strong levels where price could bounce from, and so on and so on and so on. So before talking any further, let's actually show you on the charts with some examples. So if we look at the horizontal, start with the horizontal lines. If we look at the monthly chart here on pound dollar and I zoom in a little bit, right away we can see that there's a level right here. Okay, this is called a support and resistance level, but it's a horizontal line, so it's horizontal support and resistance. And you can see here that we have one rejection, we have second rejection, we have the third rejection, we have number 4, number 5, and then over here we have a break and retest, number 6. So over here, this horizontal level is acting as support, right? We have 1, 2, 3, 4 rejections off of this support level, right? So this horizontal line is now acting as support, but when we get a break and retest of that support and resistance line, now it becomes resistance. So if we look right here, it was acting as support, and then we finally broke that support. It came back to reject it, becoming resistance, right? So this is the type of lines that we want to be focusing on, because they tell us that when there's enough rejections off of a specific horizontal level, it means that it could continue, that level can continue to be rejected into the future, right? If it's been rejected in the past, it can still continue to be rejected in the future. So that's why we plot these horizontal lines on our time frames to actually identify potential turnaround points, potential points in price where price action can actually turn around, reject, and turn around. And that is what we want to focus on. So we want to draw these lines at very key levels, making sure that they are rejected in the past, either acting as support or resistance, right? So that we can identify, okay, there's this really good horizontal level, there's a really good chance that it might be rejected again. Or if you actually see it being rejected, that means that it's actually a potential trade. So if we come back here and look directly on the chart, we can see that on the monthly chart, this is a really strong horizontal support level. And there are two things I want you to talk about, that I want to talk about with you, and that's major levels and minor levels. Major levels are major horizontal levels that are being rejected all the time. You know, they might have a break here and there, but a lot of the times they're being rejected. Minor support and resistance levels are lines that are being rejected once in a while, and they're also being broken quite a bit of time, quite a bit as well. So they're not that strong as major support levels. So if we look at the chart, this is what I would call a major horizontal support and resistance line, because it's being rejected a lot of the times. It's only been broken a couple, right? Now, if we focus a little bit closer here, this is where that analysis comes in. So I'll give you a little bit of an example on how to do analysis. And we have this tool here where we can jump back in time to here. And this is how I would do my analysis. As an example, I would know that there is this horizontal level that's being rejected. right? And if I was looking at this time frame in real time, actually as it was sitting right here, this was back in 2018. But if I was looking at this in real time, I would have noticed that we had this breakdown and this pullback. So what was once support, right? That's a very important term. You can write this down. What was once support becomes resistance, and what was once resistance will become support. And that's an example that we have here. What was once support, this horizontal level was acting as support. Once broken, becomes resistance. And those are the type of lines that we want to be focusing on, the strong ones. Now, let me show you some other examples of horizontal lines. And if we look at the daily chart as an example, right away, we can notice that back in the past here, we had support, right? So over here, this was also a support level. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 rejections. We also have support and resistance up here. So when you're drawing in these levels, you want to get as precise as possible. You want to make sure that in general, they are being rejected. So we have one good rejection over here. Second, what was once resistance, it was broken to the upside, became support. And we have 2 rejections over here. And we have another rejection over there and another one over here. So this is another major support and resistance level because it's being rejected quite a bit. Right? We have good bounces off of this line. Now let's toss in a few more. So if we focus more on the recent times, right here, let's check this out. So if we zoom in, right away, we can notice that this is acting as support and it acted as support over here as well. But only 2 rejections does not necessarily mean that it's a good level. We need more than 2 bounces off of a specific horizontal line, preferably 3 and up, right? So if we go farther back in time here, is that level actually acting as support and resistance? I mean, over here, there was a rejection. There was some consolidation and price action was rejecting this level right here as well. So this is something I would call a minor support and resistance level. Why? Because it's being broken and rejected quite a few times. You know, it's not a major level. A major level, typically you have major levels at extremes. So extreme lows where price action is just bouncing off of it, and extreme highs where again, price doesn't want to go any farther up or doesn't want to go any farther down. The minor levels typically fall in somewhere in the middle there, where price action rejects it a little bit, but also breaks it quite a few times. So those are minor horizontal support and resistance lines. Now, if we go even farther, let's keep on plotting them. You start seeing them all over. Once you actually start focusing on horizontal lines, you start seeing how actually valuable they are. Here's another, what I would call a major horizontal support and resistance line. 1 rejection, 2 rejections, 3rd rejection, number 4, number 5, number 6, number 7. This is a major horizontal support and resistance line because it has 7 rejections, 7 very clear rejections. And that is, again, those are the type of horizontal levels that I want to be focusing on, the ones that have very clear rejections. Now, that's horizontal lines acting as support and resistance levels. Now, trend lines. Trend lines are very similar, but obviously horizontal lines are horizontal, trend lines are diagonal. So here we have a trend line. This trend line we have trend lines when price action is trending. So whenever we're in a trend, typically we could draw in a trend line. And this is an example of a trend line here, right? So we have 1, 2, 3 rejections, and we never got a 4th, you know? So if you draw it in here, right? Again, price action is holding it, rejecting it pretty well. So that's good, right? That's a good trend line. And we have 3 rejections. So whenever we have 3 rejections or more, it means that that's a good trend line, or also a good horizontal support and resistance line. Whenever we have 3 rejections, it means that that support and resistance is actually working. So let's zoom out farther. Let's play around with this a little bit. Let's maybe go back to the monthly chart. And I'll show you a really good example of a trend line, which is right here. Right, and it's very important that I want to show you how I draw these trend lines, because there's a few ways of drawing them. And if we focus on this recent price action, I am mainly focusing on the open and close prices of these wicks, of these candlesticks, right? So just kind of where we have the open and close prices, not the extreme lows, but the open and close, open and close. And then again, the same concept that I told you to write down, what was once support becomes resistance, and what was once resistance becomes support. Check it out right here, right? Again, what was once support, 1, 2, 3 rejections, so that's a good trend line, was broken and now acted as resistance. Price rejected it and fell to the downside. What was once support becomes resistance. That is a very important concept to note. So that's kind of a very brief introduction into horizontal lines and trend lines. But before I move on, I just want to show you a few more examples. And let's draw one in over here. So that's also a potential trend line. We always want to be drawing trend lines just following the price. And you can play around with it. So as an example, if price pulls back over here, right? If we get a pullback, we could potentially get a rejection off of this trend line, right? We have 1, 2, 3 rejections. Let me make this bigger. So this is the weekly time frame. So we have 3 decent rejections off of this line. So if we get a pullback here, we might get a 4th, you know, or if it breaks it, right? Then if price breaks this, then what we might see is a retest. What was once resistance now becomes support and a trade to the upside. So that's kind of a brief explanation of what horizontal lines are and what trend lines are. Pretty much they are acting as support and resistance. The main things that we want to note is what was once support becomes resistance. So whenever we get these major lines, the major horizontal levels, or even major trend lines, we also always want to be focusing on the extremes, right? The extremes in price action, the extreme lows or the extreme highs. Anything in the middle is typically minor. It can still work as a good support and resistance level, whether it's a trend line or a horizontal line. It can still work as long as you have more than 3 rejections, right? But the ones that I personally want to focus on, the ones that are really good, are the ones that happen at the extreme lows, like we have seen right here on this monthly chart. Those are extreme lows, right? So that is a very strong support level, and that's the type of support levels that I want to be focusing on, right? Same thing with the trend lines. I want to be focusing and drawing them on the extreme lows or the extreme highs. Anything through the middle is minor. It's a minor support and resistance line, right? And sometimes they are good, sometimes they're not. But the extreme ones are typically really good. Now, I want to show you one more example. Let's show you something totally different. And here I already have a couple lines drawn in. So check it out. Recent price action, we have this level right here. 2 lines. General, what was once support over here, right? You can see on this daily chart. What was once support, we had a break and retest, and now it's acting as resistance, right? So we never held this level as support. If we did, it would have been a continuation to the upside, but instead it failed. It continued lower, but now it's acting as resistance, right? Same thing over here. We have this line that's roughly in this area. Sometimes these levels, they're not always super precise. It can be a range. It can be a little bit of a zone, right? So in this case, I mean, this could look something like that, right? Where we can see that this general zone is being rejected, because in this case, we are rejecting right here on the bottom, right here, again, rejecting this lower level, but very close, just a little bit above it, we have another resistance level. So to me, this is a little bit of a zone. Price action is pretty much rejecting somewhere in the middle of that zone. So sometimes we have these little zones, and sometimes the lines are very precise. So it's just important to note that as well. So this is just another example of some horizontal lines that we can be drawing in. And here is an example of a recent trend line. Again, you always just want to be focusing on the extreme lows. And in this case, it looked like it was being rejected, but it broke it to the downside. So now, if it comes back, what was once support could become resistance, right? And let's have another look at something totally random. Here I already pre-drew a few trend lines that you guys can have a look at and check this out. So we have this beautiful trend line here with 1, 2, 3, 4 rejections, and then price just continue to go lower. So you can potentially even draw in another trend line right there, where we had 1, 2, 3 rejections, and then here's another one, 1, 2, and 3. So it's typically we have these two levels, number 1 and number 2, right? So that's kind of where we always want to start, the first two extremes, and then we expand, right? And now we have the third rejection. This already has three really good hits, and this is a potential opportunity to take this trade to the downside. Same thing here, right? We have already number 1, number 2, two good levels, and then price action was rejecting this level right here. This is the third rejection of the trend line. It's a potentially a good trade to the downside. Then it came back to reject it for the fourth time, even better. Now this level is even stronger, and again, a potential trade to the downside. So that is it when it comes to these horizontal support and resistance lines, and also trend lines acting as support and resistance. The main things that I want you to focus on is, again, like I said previously, extremes, extreme lows, extreme highs in price action. Those are typically where we get the best support and the best resistance. Anything in the middle is minor, right? And those are static support and resistance levels, meaning that the levels don't change themselves. Dynamic support and resistance levels are ones that we already looked at. We looked at it in the previous lesson when it's called the EMA, the exponential moving average. That is a dynamic support and resistance level because it changes with price, right? Now the EMA also acts as support and resistance. Same terminology applies, same concept. What was once support becomes resistance. That is applied with the 50 EMA, and that's something that we're actually going to be focusing on all the time. Whenever we analyze charts, this is what we're doing, right? And we're going to be getting deeper and deeper and deeper into this concept as we go through this masterclass. But for now, this is all that you need to know when it comes to support and resistance lines. We're going to talk about it much more detail as we go through these lessons. But for now, that's enough information for you guys. I'll see you in the next lesson.